Scott Sloan Show. It's this News Radio 700 WLW. We have the 800-year flood in Houston. One initial estimate has damages around $30 billion. They said when it's all said and done, and we're talking maybe a decade or more to fix everything, over $100 billion will be spent to restore the city of Houston. Estimates, though, are just 27% of the damage. So roughly 1 in 4 people covered by insurance, which brings up a host of other interesting questions. Lloyd Vickers is a licensed public insurance adjuster. He's worked to Andrew, Katrina, Rita, Sandy, now Harvey. He's like Elvis. He only does the big rooms. Lloyd, good morning. How are you?
Good, Steve. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine. Federal flood insurance program is out there. Katrina, I think the rate was like half the people basically had insurance. The feds offer that federal flood insurance. Apparently nobody buys this thing. And I'm just curious, why are we spending money rebuilding things for people if they don't have some skin in the game? Is it too soon? Is it too cruel to think, Lloyd, that if I live in a floodplain, I should buy the insurance to insure my stuff?
Well, Steve, honestly, if you live in a floodplain and you have a mortgage on your house, chances are they would make you buy insurance, flood insurance on that particular property.
Right.
Where you get into a problem is where you live in the outlying areas. And there's a lot of misconception with folks that haven't actually are not really well versed in insurance as to whether or not they actually have coverage or not. But, I'm here to tell you that if you have a dwelling policy and you think you have flood insurance, you don't. Unless you have 2 separate policies, for the most part, there aren't hardly any policies left anymore that cover flood insurance that were a dwelling and flood insurance. It's a totally separate policy than the one that you have for your home.
Right, which was why we see those commercials all the time for the flood insurance. It's a national program. It's subsidized by the feds simply because no private underwriter is going to insure a property that's going to get flooded every 10 years at full replacement.
Correct.
Right? That's
Correct.
why. So
Correct.
Even the insurance is subsidized to some degree.
Well, that's right. Yeah, most of it is subsidized, and it goes back to the federal government either through the FEMA program or some of the others. But the unfortunate portion of this is now we're having these floods on such a consistent basis that the program itself is actually taxed to the max. I mean, if what you said is true, and we do wind up with another $100 billion storm, that's exactly on lines with what Katrina cost.
Right.
And so Hurricane Harvey is going to take his place in the top 5 of all top 5 hurricanes.
Yeah, so the problem is this, right? We had 100,000 people move to Houston after what happened with Hurricane Katrina. And now here's 12 years later, they're doing it all over again, but also probably don't have insurance. So the people who lost everything there and weren't insured moved to Houston. And I'm guessing that when you look at 1 in 4 have insurance now, meaning 75% or more don't, that the same lesson is repeated again. At what point do we just simply say, if you live in these areas, you got to have flood insurance. You got to buy the flood insurance. You do it for your car. You do it to buy a home. Why wouldn't that be included in all this stuff and just make it mandatory like every other form of insurance is?
Well, and to be honest with you, Steve, I think what you're going to see, the federal government's going to have to start looking at folks like yourself and myself. I don't live in the flood area. I would venture to say that you don't either up in Cincinnati. Mm-mm. But at some point in time, they're going to have to look at a larger number base because that's how insurance is actually bought. You got to spread the risk around through a lot of different people. I think they're going to start looking at some of this as maybe a national type program in order for this thing to be solvent again.
Yeah. Lloyd Vickers is yeah, go ahead.
And we've talked about that on several occasions.
Right.
So
Lloyd Vickers is a licensed public insurance adjuster, works pretty much in these big hurricanes, and I think that's disturbing to people to hearing the news that 1 in 4 people are actually covered by insurance on this thing, meaning we're going to have to pick up the tab. He joins me this morning on the Steve Sloan Show here, News Radio 700 WLW. At some point, you simply would have to force people to buy. It sounds like Obamacare almost in that degree, right? Is it going, listen, if you buy a house, but how does that apply to someone maybe who's renting or doesn't outright own their own home? I mean, we're talking about the 100,000 people who were displaced from Katrina, largely minority and poor. So can you really force those people to buy insurance?
Yeah, if you're a renter, I mean, obviously you're going to have renter's insurance, and basically that only covers the contents. And there is a specific policy under the flood insurance for contents. Matter of fact, that's another misnomer that some people may not be aware of. You can buy flood insurance for your house, but it doesn't automatically come with contents coverage unless you specifically ask for it, and it's covered separately. So we were in Louisiana last week working the floods from a year ago. Some of those folks had their houses fixed, some of them didn't. But we found that about 50% of those people that had flood coverage didn't have contents coverage. And so it's really important for people to review their policies and see what they have, especially before a storm hits.
Right. And that's the other thing, too, is the contents not covered is when FEMA comes in and they write a check to all these folks to rebuild their houses so that in 10 years we could do this all over again, apparently. Did they include content for that? They just cut them one check? How much of that do you know how much that covers?
Well, it really depends. I mean, the maximum in Louisiana that they could actually write for was $250,000 on the dwelling and $100,000 on contents. And it's probably going to be the same regardless of where you're at, but that's the maximum amount of coverage that you can get.
Well, that's fine if you own up to a house that's worth $250,000, I would guess. And let's say I owned a $200,000 house. The contents were $100,000. So FEMA would just give me a check for $300,000.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, they send their people out, and they're looking to see what has occurred at the property, and then if it's a flood, they're looking at the flood line down, how far up the wall actually wicked, so they know how much to take out. But they go in and they write estimates, and we found in the estimates that we did, we found that there were some mistakes made, and there were some additional monies due to these people. And so, if you're unsure as far as what you should be compensated for, it would be very beneficial to you to get somebody who knows this business and how it works to help you put together an estimate. Because under all policies, it's your responsibility to submit your estimate or your claim to the insurance company.
Yeah, we got Lloyd Vickers on the show. He's a licensed public insurance adjuster on the Steve Sloan Show here at 700 WOW. And one of the things too that you hear about though is we want to rebuild. Obviously, you just can't have a whole bunch of people not have homes and be upside down. You got to do something for it. Is as you said too, the federal program is swimming in debt. I just looked it up. $25 billion. It's underwater. And it's going to expire on September 30. Congress will probably just renew it, right, at some point, and go, we'll just throw more taxpayer money at the thing, and it's something that we all pay for. I wouldn't say it's irresponsible to live in areas like Houston, but it's wholly irresponsible to live there and not have some coverage and have basic coverage on your dwelling. You got to pay a little bit more into that. Do you have any idea, Lloyd, exactly how much it costs for flood insurance?
Well, it really depends on where you're at. The closer that you get to the water, the bodies of water that are around Texas, the more expensive it actually gets. And so I've seen some policies be in the $1,500 range, and I've seen some that are even more expensive than that, $4,000 or $5,000 a year. Just depends on where you're at on the flood map.
Here in Cincinnati, we have some low-lying areas, creeks, streams, things like that. Certainly, we're not going to get hit by a hurricane, but I wonder if there's people that live along these rivers that have floodplain insurance. I don't know how you would find that information out, but it does apply some degree here in Cincinnati. Generally, we're worried about things like tornadoes, but typically a homeowner's policy is going to cover wind damage, right?
Typically, it will. But what we're seeing now is that a lot of these policies are changing. And like I said before, you cannot sit back and just buy a policy and stick it in the drawer and expect to have the coverage that you thought you may have purchased 10 years ago, because we're seeing changes in the policy, changes in the deductible. And so you really need to review your policies every 2 years to see what coverage you have and what new coverage may be available to make sure that in the event of a storm like this, that you have the proper coverage.
Yeah. Businesses typically are better covered than individuals, aren't they?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Are businesses better covered than individuals as far as the insurance goes?
Well, I mean, that's a separate policy. There's
Right,
a policy
right.
for commercial coverage versus homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you get into a lot of different things that a business would actually be insured for that possibly a homeowner would not, like loss of use, which there is on both, but loss of rents, loss of incomes, all that kind of thing comes into effect for the commercial coverage. So in my opinion, commercial is a little bit better, but you have to have a business to have that type of coverage.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. I think most business owners probably are going to have some coverage there, although I saw a story of a guy who owns something like 5,000 rentals in the Houston area, and their lower income ones like $500 a month, which sounds like, oh, it's not bad, but, Houston, it's a much, much bigger city. He owns like 5,000 properties, apartments, and he said he only had part of them insured. And I'm looking at going, as someone who is in a rental business, that just seems wholly irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have some rental properties myself, and it's very important to have those insured because you're not there all the time. You don't know what's going on. So, it's a risk management feature to have that, but to have 5,000 and not have them all covered seems like a pretty big financial risk to me.
Yeah, sounds like that guy's going to be in some serious trouble. Somebody just called and said they have property in Hilton Head, North Carolina. Their flood insurance on a $600,000 house is underwritten by FEMA. It's $675 for the policy. I'm guessing that's annually, and a 5% deductible, which would be $30,000. So, but I mean,
there you go.
That's a good chunk of change, but that's a pretty sizable house, $600,000. I mean, $675 on that is not that much.
Right.
Yeah. And
here's the thing. We talked about that a while ago about the deductibles going up. That's a 5% deductible on the house.
Mm-hmm.
So, everything's relative. If you can afford a deductible that big and on that particular house, it'll probably come out okay. But at the same time, if you can't afford something like that, it becomes monumentally disastrous for you to try to have to come up with the $30,000 deductible if you have to do that.
Right.
So you have to be real careful with that as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the other thing. You're writing a policy on a second home. You probably should have $30,000 just in case something goes wrong or means to actually tap into and get $30,000. Lloyd Vickers, licensed public insurance adjuster. Thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it. Have a good day.